Radical Humanities, the radical tradition in the humanities. I'm Professor Williams. I'm one of the co-chairs of the conference with Professor Jennifer Wager. And today we bring to you Narratives of Revolution, and we have three filmmakers who will be talking about films in relation to our broad conference theme.
Our second speaker will be Professor Victoria Timpanaro. Her work is called The Counterculture and Revolution in Films of the New Hollywood. Victoria Timpanaro is a filmmaker, musician, and manager of the production services at Essex County College. She also runs the college's educational access station for Cablevision, Channel 77, for Verizon Fios, Channel 37, and teaches CIN 101, Introduction to the Art of Film. Professor Timpanaro's academic career started at Brookdale Community College, where she received an AA in music and an AAS in television production. She was also an active member of the Alpha Phi Theta chapter and of the Phi Theta Kappa Honor Society. At Ramapo College, she earned a double BA in the electronic music and digital video art while minoring in women's studies. Professor Timpanaro completed her MA in media studies at the New School. Her thesis work, a documentary entitled Indie Cult Horror, examined underground horror films from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. She is currently working with the new documentary series titled Real Women, looking at women in horror and sci-fi films.
Okay, so when I heard the topic for this year's conference was radicalism, it made me think of revolution and trying to find a revolutionary period within film historically. I was drawn to the idea of the New Hollywood movement in the 60s, in the late 60s and the 70s. So what we're looking at is the counterculture and revolution in films in New Hollywood, or how three movies changed the world as we know it, without most of us knowing this. The revolution of New Hollywood took place from very much inside the system, like a coup. A band of young upstarts essentially pushed the old regime into the modern age, kicking and screaming. The studio heads didn't understand the counterculture ideas of the younger generation, and to the suits at the top, it was still business as usual. When a cookie-cutter A-list picture started to flop all around them, they didn't understand why. It was time for a change. In walk a bunch of kids who were obsessed with the French New Wave and the work of men like François Truffaut, and old minds were blown away by this new sensibility. In a way, New Hollywood is the story of how art house became part of the mainstream. So you see, we still have these very epic and not quite what people were looking for at the time to see in the 60s. Because movies are expensive and time-consuming to make, Hollywood is always the last to know, the slowest to change, and in those years, it was at least half a decade behind the other popular arts. This is from Peter Biskind in his E.D. Writer's Raging Bulls. Three movies that were pivotal to this movement of change were The Graduate, Easy Rider, and Bonnie and Clyde. The Graduate for its treatment of sex and promiscuity, Easy Rider for bringing drug culture into the mainstream, and Bonnie and Clyde brought violence to new heights. So now we had sex, drugs, and violence. The only thing missing was rock and roll, but remember, film's late to the game, so they're already having their revolution somewhere else. The three movies that are, the defining themes for these three films, as much as the New Hollywood movement, were the disrespect of authority and a series of protagonist anti-heroes. Much like the hippie mantra of never trust anyone over 30, these movies reflect a time when teenagers and young adults everywhere agreed that adults were square and the man wasn't going to keep them down. Using movies to tell stories about characters with these ideas helped the audience find a collective voice, and they could respond to this and even idolize it. Starting with Bonnie and Clyde. In 1967, Warren Beatty was a big star. He had made a few successful films, had been declared a bona fide heartthrob, but his last few projects had been flops, and he wanted to do something big. Beatty was on a quest to bring the excitement of the French New Wave to America, and on the opposite side of the country in New York, two writers from Esquire magazine, Robert Benton and David Newman, had also become obsessed with the French New Wave and wanted to write a film for Truffaut to do. The pair also recently came across a book that chronicled lives and times of 30s criminals, including the story of Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. They became obsessed with this story. They tried to bring a script to Truffaut, but he wasn't available, so he recommended Beatty. And Beatty brought on Arthur Penn to direct, cast Faye Dunaway as Bonnie, played Clyde himself, and they were ready to make a movie. So why was the 60s the right time to tell the story of 30s crime heroes, Bonnie and Clyde? They are the original American disenchanted youth. In the middle of the Great Depression, they bucked the system and took matters into their own hands. True anti-heroes, they lived on their own terms and didn't trust anyone in authority. They didn't trust cops, banks, parents, any of it. They also had a flair for boasting, short tempers, and more than anything, even more than the desire to be rich, was the desire to be famous. This was a key difference. Here you see what the real Bonnie and Clyde compared to the movie Bonnie and Clyde, which I think is pretty fascinating. I think they're almost more exciting than the movie. Beatty and the crew completely shock Hollywood with their unconventional film. Not only does it glorify the life and crimes of this ragtag band of bank robbers and cop killers, but at the same time crushed many archetypes of the mainstream movies. For a start, there's a romance at the center of the plot. And while there have been many flirtatious courtships within it, much to Bonnie's dismay, this relationship is never consummated. For all the charisma that oozes from Clyde's personality, he is asexual in nature. Bonnie, on the other hand, is very comfortable with her own sexuality, and as the audience knows this right off the bat because she is introduced in her first scene naked. While Bonnie is continually frustrated as her advances are pushed aside, Clyde just seems more and more excited about the prospects of the next big heist. It is quite a statement at this time to switch the usual gender expectations in film by having the very sexual female figure that is paired with a male figure that is disinterested in physical relationships. This is especially risky given that Warren Beatty was considered a sex symbol. This is one of the things that was really appealing about this part for him. Another taboo that is broken in Bonnie and Clyde is the overt use of violence. Despite the happy-go-lucky nature of the film in the beginning, once Clyde shoots and kills his first victim on a bank job that goes wrong, things get real. The audience is spared no detail in the effects of short-range shotgun blasts to the face. From this point on, there is no turning back for the gang or for the audience. We are witness as the Barrow gang repeatedly gets found and cornered by the police and have to make a hasty exit in a bloody shootout. They're not particularly good at what they do, is what I'm trying to get at here. They keep getting caught. Time after time, the gang plows through barricades of cop cars, shotguns blazing, taking out policemen left and right. These violent escapades offend critics on many levels. First, there was the intense bloodshed of the scenes. Then there was the total lack of remorse from the killers. And finally, there was the juxtaposition of these violent acts over very plucky, upbeat banjo tunes, which is mixing up the score. It almost has a cartoon kind of nature to it. This thumb to the nose of expected morality was too much. Not only did these hedonistic protagonists continually get away, quite literally, with murder, but they become folk heroes in the end as a reward for their pluck. The finale of the film is the bloodiest scene yet. Just as in real life, state troopers set up an elaborate ambush and upload a barrage of bullets at the pair. The cops viciously get back at Bonnie and Clyde for making them look like fools and killing some of their own in the process. In what became one of the grisliest scenes depicted by Hollywood at the time, we watch in slow motion from multiple camera angles as the bullets tear their car and their bodies to shreds in what is now called their dance of death. The law catches up with Bonnie and Clyde in the end of the film, and it has no problem showing you in the cruelest scene in the entire picture, and then unapologetically cuts to black and goes to credits. That's it, end of story. No one could have been prepared for the impact of Bonnie and Clyde. Even without the support from Warner Brothers, film festivals and audiences slowly started to fall in love with the movie. At first, the critics didn't get it and panned the film for its over-the-top violence and threadbare aesthetics. Some even waged their own war against the film in response to the lack of morality and traditional style. Bosley Crowther from the New York Times, he specifically had a hatred for this film. He called it a cheap, bald-faced slapstick that treats the hideous depredations of that sleazy, moronic pair as they were full-on and fun and frolic. That's rough. Eventually, there was a shift as other critics started to take notice of the young audiences that lined up to see it at the theater over and over again. So kind of like the hero for them was this woman, Pauline Kael. She applauded the film, stating, "Bonnie and Clyde is the most exciting American movie since The Manchurian Candidate. The audience is alive with it." She felt it was really tapping into the youth movement. So she had this escapade to get it put back in more theaters and made sure it was given a second chance. She would lead a campaign, and the film became so popular in Europe that there was a resurgence in 30s fashion called Bonnie style, which is crazy. In the end, Bonnie and Clyde resonated with the youth culture more than any film before it and helped to spark a revolution against the old regime. So, let's talk about The Graduate. Very different movie. A few months later, The Graduate came onto the scene. A film that looks at how a boy goes away to college and comes home a man with no idea what to do next with his life. The story starts when Ben, played by Dustin Hoffman, comes home to his family just after graduating from college, where he's been quite a success and an award-winning track star. His parents welcome him home with a party at their luxurious home in an affluent neighborhood, with all their friends lining up to congratulate Ben. He is a child in a sea of adults. He's trapped, he can't escape. Then one of the neighbors, a Mrs. Robinson, insists that Ben gives her a ride home. Once they arrive, she proceeds to famously attempt to seduce him, but only truly succeed in terrifying poor Ben. Luckily for him, Mr. Robinson arrives and Ben is free to go. Eventually, Ben reconsiders her advances, and the two begin to engage in an affair. All of this is cut short when Mrs. Robinson's daughter comes home from college and is reintroduced to Ben, who almost instantly falls in love with her. And of course, this is where Ben's life gets complicated. So director Mike Nichols does an amazing job of illustrating to the audience what it feels like for Ben. While he's a man of few words, he understands his ineffectiveness in life as he wanders through aimlessly until he finds his true purpose. Ben is constantly being told what to do, and he is very compliant in his orders. He has no goals in life now that college is over. At the opening party scene, he is constantly being bombarded and concurrently accoladed with questions about his future that he experiences in this dizzying array that's hard for Ben and hard for us. The scene is told in claustrophobic series of close-up shots. Let me see if I have. Show you guys a little bit of that. We want to escape as badly as Ben.
The Carlsons are here.
They are. Well,
Take a look at the.
come on.
They came all the way from Tarzana. Come on, let's get cracking.
It's a wonderful thing to have so many devoted friends.
Hey, there's the award-winning scholar.
We're all very proud of you, Ben.
Thank you, Mrs. Carlson.
Is that the new car out
Scene
there?
that we spend the
little red
entire
watch?
That's
scene
Ben's
right here.
graduation
Well, you won't have much trouble picking him up in that, will you?
Sir.
The girls, the chicks, the teeny boppers.
Oh, I think Ben's gotten beyond the teeny bopper stage, haven't you, Ben?
Yes, ma'am. Excuse me, I think I'd just like to check something on the car for a minute.
His father bought him an Alfa Romeo.
Hey, here's the track star. How are you, track star?
Just fine, Mr. Loomis.
I want to get a drink. Then I want to hear all about that thing that you won, that Hopperman Award.
Helping me.
Helping him. Right. You wait right here.
We're all so proud of you.
Proud.
You guys get what I see. It's very claustrophobic.
What are you going to do now?
I was going to go upstairs for a minute.
Oh, I meant with your future.
You
Your
can't get out.
life.
There's no
Well,
way.
that's a little hard to
They're not letting him. But, so luckily for him, though, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Rob, it isn't until Mrs. Robinson arrives that the scene opens up visually. While she is still telling him what to do, when we can tell right away that she is not like the rest of these partygoers. She's not square. As the scene shifts to her home, we are no longer confined to these such tight frames, but her intentions become clear. Ben becomes isolated in the frame by her body, kind of like that shot over here. We see her from behind an arm, through a triangle made by her legs. Ben feels trapped again and needs to escape. As the affair begins, we see that Ben still needs to constantly be told what to do. He has no ambition in life, so he has no idea how to proceed even in their liaison. Night after night, Ben follows Mrs. Robinson's script, while all day long he meanders through life drinking beer and floating adrift in the family pool while ignoring his parents and any responsibilities. Just like this inflatable raft, Ben is drifting through life. At the same time, I would also like to point out that Ben's demeanor and body language changes in this period as well. He started off in that first scene very stiff. He's always in a suit. But as soon as they start having an affair, instantly he's the cool guy with shades on, hanging out by the pool, very different guy. But he still doesn't know what he's doing with his life. Eventually, Ben starts to get bored with the repetition of their meetings and wants to talk. He starts to ask Mrs. Robinson questions so that he can learn more about her. This disrupts the pattern. Once Mrs. Robinson starts to lose control of the situation, the illusion starts to fade. She is no longer this mysterious figure. She is now an unhappy woman who is bored with her life and her marriage. The only thing in life that she cares about is her daughter. And from here, the story changes, and eventually Ben realizes that he needs to find a purpose in life that will come when he stops messing around and finds real love. The studio execs did not know what to do with this movie. They were hoping for a lighthearted sex comedy, but instead they end up with this thing they thought was for art house theaters. And at first, it seemed like it was a flop. But then the college kids came home for the holidays and started to line up in droves to see the movie. Young Americans latched onto the Graduate hard, and a big part of that came from the score, comprised almost entirely of folk songs by Simon and Garfunkel. In '67, this music set the time and the place of the movie for here and now. It also helps that it makes Ben one of them, because his life had the same soundtrack that theirs did. Quite possibly more than any generation before them, youth culture of the '60s was defined by their music. So much like Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate had a polarizing effect on its audience. Many adults just didn't get the humor. Younger audience howled at the depiction of the square grown-ups and cheered for Ben when he found his way. Like their protagonists, many of them were also aimlessly wandering through life trying to figure out, well, what do you do when college is over? Many of the critics were also confused and saw Dustin Hoffman as a loser, while kids felt that he represented the everyman. While so many critics felt it was trite and poorly made, here's John Simon wrote, oversimplification, over-elaboration, inconsistency, eclecticism, obviousness, pretentiousness. That's not a review. While others praised the film for its originality. Roger Ebert, very young Roger Ebert, when he first started working for the Chicago Sun-Times, wrote, "It's the funniest American comedy of the year because it has a point of view. That is to say, it is against something." So you see, eventually it finds an audience. So the last one I want to talk about is Easy Rider, a couple years later. Around the same time that The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde were wading through the award season, two young actors were coming together to make a picture together on their own terms, with their own story and with them at the helm. Both Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper had both been appearing in B-movies aimed at the young audiences that featured hippies, drugs, motorcycle gangs, but they wanted to push the motorcycle movie in a new direction that aligned it more with the old westerns that showed men traversing the vast countryside, but instead of horses, they'd ride bikes. Easy Rider is the story of two bikers that are drug dealers who make a score of a lifetime. So they decide to celebrate by riding cross-country from LA to New Orleans just in time for Mardi Gras. Fonda would produce, Hopper would direct, and while both would star as the two main characters you see here. Originally assuming that they would produce this film for Roger Corman's AIP Pictures, the film was actually picked up by Columbia, which catapulted their original B-movie expectations to a much bigger and broader possible audience. The Western motif of the film is shown in their transient lifestyle, driving from town to town over endless miles of highway. 3 minutes, oof. Everywhere they go, the pair are outlaws and bandits. A large focus of the screen time is given to these intense driving shots, which were kind of like music videos for songs from Steppenwolf, Bob Dylan, and Jimi Hendrix. When the pair does stop, the audience gets to see how different types of people react to these hippies on motorcycles showing up on their turf. Some farmers who live off the grid or local communes, they take them in, You know, they give them a meal and they fit in. Others don't react so well. Eventually, the bikers run into Jack Nicholson's character here, who's a lawyer, and they become friends. He goes with them. They teach him how to get high. A pivotal point in the film, though, is when the three stop at a local diner in Louisiana. While the audience has witnessed people discriminate and deny services to the biker hippies throughout their journey, in this scene, we get to see how harsh this prejudice can be. A table full of men is instantly offended by the mere sight of these travelers and loudly spews hateful language in their direction. At the same time, an adjacent table of teenage girls becomes enamored with them as if they're rock stars. The dichotomy of these two tables shows how divided the country was at the time by the hippie movement. After the extended period of time being ignored by the restaurant staff and harassed by the male clientele, the trio becomes, they move on only to be brutally attacked that night in their campsite by the same men. Their hatred of this indecent other, these long-haired men, challenges their way of life so much that they feel the need to respond with violence. This was a harsh side effect of the peace and love movement. I'm going to move along. On their last night camping on the road, Hooper's character is excited with their prospects of making it. Now they can use what's left of their haul and retire in Florida. Cryptically, Fonda replies, "We blew it." There's much debate over what this means. He doesn't really explain himself. But the next day, their story ends much like Bonnie and Clyde's, with the brutal killing of the anti-heroes. In the end, all of the trials and tribulations that the bikers went through in their long, hard journey was for nothing. To me, that's what Fonda means. He knew that they had no future. Easy Rider struck a chord with the young audiences, which longed to live this free life on the road without parents, bosses, or teachers telling them what to do. Paired with a soundtrack, which was the greatest hits of the day, the movie was a huge hit. Hopper went on record saying that they made all their money back the first week it hit theaters in one location. To them, this was vindication, beating Hollywood at its own game, proof that you could get high, express yourself, and make money at the same time. All right. I just have one quote in my conclusion here. So, in the book, Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, Peter Biskind says, "This is the last time Hollywood produced a body of risky, high-quality work as opposed to the errant masterpieces. Work that was character rather than plot-driven, defied traditional narrative conventions, challenged the tyranny of technical correctness, and broke the taboos of language and behavior. They dared to end unhappily. They were often films without heroes, without romance, and without someone to root for." So in closing, what can we learn from these three films? So the first lesson to me is that it was time for change. If young filmmakers had not come across and taken these first steps for them, Hollywood probably would have killed themselves. And these three films opened the doors for people like Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, all the people who end up really saving Hollywood. The second lesson is to listen to what your audiences want, not what you think they want. While the stories were getting told over and over again, audiences, particularly young viewers, were bored. They longed for new stories and see characters that they could relate to on the big screen. And my third lesson is to seek innovation by taking in what others are doing. New Hollywood was the actions of a group of people who all agreed that the French New Wave was the right way to go. All three of these directors took what they saw in the French aesthetic and made it their own. Don't be afraid to emulate others, but be sure to bring something to you to that style as well. Make the art, regardless of the medium, individual and different. Make New Hollywood proud and help bring about the new Hollywood tomorrow.
Okay, I would like to thank our presenters. This was truly an excellent way to close out this conference.